The Israel-Palestine conflict is an enduring struggle with deep historical roots and profound implications that continue to impact the modern world. To understand the complexity of this issue, let's explore the pivotal moments that have shaped this conflict, tracing it from its earliest origins in ancient territorial disputes and religious connections to the land, through the 20th century political upheavals, and into the recent escalations that have intensified global concern and involvement. Each of these moments has left a lasting imprint on the people, the land, and the ongoing quest for a peaceful resolution. To understand today's conflict, we need to go back to the 19th century. Zionism, a Jewish nationalist movement, emerged as a response to the widespread persecution of Jews in Europe. Zionists aimed to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine, a land they saw as their ancient birthplace. This dream gained international momentum in 1917 when Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, supporting a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. However, the land was already home to a large Arab population who feared displacement. These competing nationalisms laid the foundation for decades of unrest. After World War I, Britain took control of Palestine under a mandate from the League of Nations, tasked with preparing the territory for independence, while respecting the rights of both Jewish and Arab communities. This period brought immense challenges, as Britain attempted to balance increasing Jewish immigration, largely spurred by European anti-Semitism, with Arab opposition rooted in fears of losing land, cultural identity, and political influence. As Jewish immigration increased, so did resistance among Palestinian Arabs, leading to frequent and violent clashes. The 1920s and 1930s saw a series of riots and uprisings, such as the 1929 Hebron massacre and the Arab Revolt from 1936 to 1939, which protested British policies and demanded an end to Jewish immigration. Unable to quell the growing unrest and faced with the devastating effects of World War II, Britain eventually handed the issue over to the newly formed United Nations in 1947. The UN proposed partitioning Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states, which Jewish leaders accepted, but Arab leaders rejected. This set the stage for the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, sparking a conflict that continues to echo through the modern Israel-Palestine dispute and remains a focal point of international tension to this day. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War, also known as the War of Independence, marked a turning point in the Middle East and the Israel-Palestine conflict. After the United Nations proposed a plan in 1947 to partition British-controlled Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states, Jewish leaders accepted the plan, while Arab leaders rejected it. Tensions erupted when Israel declared its independence on May 14, 1948. Within hours, neighboring Arab states, including Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, launched a military intervention, aiming to prevent the establishment of Israel and support Palestinian Arabs. The conflict saw intense battles and widespread displacement, with hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs fleeing or being expelled from their homes, an event Palestinians remember as the Nakba, or catastrophe. By 1949, Israel signed armistice agreements with neighboring Arab states, securing its sovereignty but leaving unresolved tensions. The war not only set the borders of the modern Israeli state, but also laid the groundwork for decades of conflict and territorial disputes. The 1956 Suez Canal crisis marked a major turning point in the Middle East and reshaped global power dynamics. Tensions escalated when Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, previously controlled by British and French companies, in response to Western refusal to fund the Aswan Dam. In response, Britain and France secretly allied with Israel, who had its own conflicts with Egypt. On October 29, 1956, Israel invaded the Sinai Peninsula, quickly advancing towards the canal. Shortly after, Britain and France issued an ultimatum for a ceasefire, which Egypt refused, prompting them to launch a military intervention. Under international pressure, especially from the US and Soviet Union, Britain, France, and Israel withdrew by early 1957, marking a rare moment of Cold War cooperation. The crisis not only bolstered Nasser's standing in the Arab world, but also signaled a decline in British and French influence, while establishing the US and the Soviet Union as key players in the Middle East. With displacement and occupation affecting Palestinians, a new organization emerged, the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, founded in 1964. The PLO emerged from a growing sense of frustration and displacement felt by Palestinians, many of whom had been displaced from their homes following the 1948 Arab-Israeli War and were living in refugee camps. These Palestinians, spread across neighboring countries like Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, felt increasingly marginalized, with limited political representation and no centralized leadership to advocate for their rights. Arab nations, led by Egypt's President Gamal Abdel Nasser, saw the need for a unified Palestinian organization to represent Palestinian interests on the global stage. The PLO was thus established with the goal of reclaiming Palestinian lands and asserting Palestinian identity, positioning itself as the voice of the Palestinian people. Initially, the PLO's structure and agenda were influenced by Arab governments, reflecting a broader pan-Arab political movement. Over time, the PLO became a central figure in the Israel-Palestine conflict, both as a political representative and, at times, a militant organization, with its vision centered on Palestinian self-determination and liberation. In June 1967, amidst escalating tensions and hostile rhetoric, Israel launched a preemptive strike against its neighboring Arab countries, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, fearing that an attack was imminent. Within just 6 days, Israel overwhelmed Arab armies and seized significant territories: the Sinai Peninsula and Gaza Strip from Egypt, the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. These strategic gains dramatically altered the region's landscape and Israel's security situation. For Israel, the capture of East Jerusalem held particular significance, as it allowed Israel to take control of the Old City and sites deeply revered in Jewish history. However, for Palestinians, this war brought additional loss and hardship, as many found themselves under Israeli occupation in the West Bank and Gaza, and the displacement of Palestinian communities continued. The status of these occupied territories remains a core issue in the Israel-Palestine conflict to this day. Both Palestinians and Israelis claim historic and religious rights to the land, but Palestinians view these areas as vital for their future state. The occupation has led to decades of tension, with ongoing disputes over land, security, and sovereignty. The 1972 Munich Olympics were meant to symbolize global unity, but they became a stage for tragedy. Members of a Palestinian militant group took 11 Israeli athletes hostage, demanding the release of 234 Palestinian prisoners held in Israel. The attackers held the athletes in a tense standoff. German authorities attempted a rescue operation, but it ended in chaos. A shootout ensued, resulting in the tragic deaths of all 11 hostages, 5 militants, and a German police officer. This horrific event shocked the world, highlighting the ongoing Israel-Palestine conflict and leading to enhanced security measures at international sporting events, forever changing the landscape of global counter-terrorism efforts. October 6, 1973, during Yom Kippur, the holiest day in Judaism, Egypt and Syria launched a coordinated surprise attack on Israel in an effort to reclaim territories lost in the 1967 Six-Day War. Israel, caught off guard, suffered significant losses in the initial days. However, after swift mobilization, the Israeli Defense Forces managed to repel the invaders and even push deep into Egyptian and Syrian territories before a ceasefire was brokered by the United Nations. The conflict exposed vulnerabilities and shattered the notion of invincibility that had emerged after previous victories. The war underscored the need for a stronger alliance with the United States, which soon became Israel's primary supplier of military aid and equipment. The war also pushed international leaders, including the US and Soviet Union, to actively pursue peace in the region, leading to the Camp David Accords in 1978, where Egypt became the first Arab nation to recognize Israel. In 1982, following a series of attacks by the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, from Lebanon, Israel launched a military invasion aimed at driving out Palestinian fighters. However, the conflict quickly escalated into a complex situation, drawing Israel into the Lebanese Civil War. The initial military success led to a prolonged occupation of Lebanon, intensifying anti-Israel sentiment across the Middle East. This invasion highlighted the interconnectedness of regional politics and the Palestinian issue, as support for Palestinian resistance grew. Ultimately, Israel's involvement in Lebanon not only complicated the conflict, but also had lasting repercussions on both Lebanese and Israeli society.